Mr. Cooper is Super, Part 2, Chapter 3. Mr. Granite is from another planet. It was Mr. Granite. Well, it wasn't our Mr. Granite because he was standing right next to us, but the alien who came down the ramp of the spaceship looked just like Mr. Granite. Our teacher, Mr. Granite, just stood there with a look of wonder on his face. Who are you? We all asked the alien, who looked just like Mr. Granite. I am Mr. Granite, said the alien. You can't be Mr. Granite, said Andrea. Mr. Granite's our teacher, and he's standing right there. I am Mr. Granite, repeated the alien, who looked just like Mr. Granite. And you'll never believe in 1,100,000 years what happened next. 10 more aliens climbed out of the spaceship, and they came down the ramp, and every one of them looked just like Mr. Granite. Who are you guys? We all asked. I am Mr. Granite. I am Mr. Granite. I am Mr. Granite. I am Mr. Granite. In case you're wondering, all the aliens were saying, I am Mr. Granite. That was weird. Will the real Mr. Granite please stand up? I asked. They're all the real Mr. Granites, said our teacher, Mr. Granite. They've come from my home planet, Etenarg. Yes, said the first alien. Everybody on Etenarg is named Mr. Granite. Etenarg is granite spelled backward. Wow, a whole planet filled with guys named Mr. Granite? That must have been really confusing. I guess when somebody on Etenarg calls out, hey, Mr. Granite, everybody turns around. So all the men on your planet look exactly the same? Asked Ryan. Yes, said Mr. Granite, and so do all the women. What? Even the women look like Mr. Granite? In fact, said one of the alien Mr. Granites, half of us are women. Eek! How do they tell the difference between men and women? I didn't want to know. Our teacher, Mr. Granite, went over and hugged one of the alien Mr. Granites. Then all the other Mr. Granites went over to hug our Mr. Granite. Everybody was hugging everybody else. Mr. Granite, said Mr. Granite. Mr. Granite, said the alien, who looked just like Mr. Granite. Mr. Granite, Mr. Granite, Mr. Granite, Mr. Granite. All the Mr. Granites were hugging each other and crying because they hadn't seen our Mr. Granite in so long. It was like a meeting of Elvis impersonators, except they all looked like Mr. Granite instead of Elvis. Did one of the Earthlings harm you in any way? One of the Mr. Granites asked our Mr. Granite. No, Mr. Granite told Mr. Granite. These are my students, and they're good to me. Well, on Earth, we're very well behaved, said Andrea, who's such a brown-noser that she'll even kiss up to aliens from other planets. What about the larger Earthlings? Asked one of the Mr. Granites. No, they've been very kind to me, said Mr. Granite. The principal of the school even gave me a key to the teacher's lounge. The teacher's lounge is a magical secret place where they have hot tubs and back rubs and all the ice cream and candy you can eat. Are you going to take over the world and turn us all into flesh-eating robots? I asked one of the Mr. Granites. I saw that in a movie once. It was cool. No, said all the Mr. Granites. Are you going to turn us into killer zombie robot slaves? Asked Michael. No, said all the Mr. Granites. Then why are you here? Asked Alexia. We have come to. The alien Mr. Granite didn't have the chance to finish his sentence because at that very moment, our principal, Mr. Klutz, came running out onto the playground. He has no hair at all. I mean none. His head is so shiny it squeaks. What is the meaning of this? Asked Mr. Klutz. Is this some kind of a joke? No. See, a joke would be like, question, what's the difference between a guitar and a fish? The answer, you can't tune a fish. Ha, get it? Tuna fish, tuna fish. Oh well. Anyway, the point is that Mr. Klutz totally doesn't know what a joke is. These men and women are from the planet Etenarg, Andrea told Mr. Klutz. Their names are all Mr. Granite. Well, I figured that, said Mr. Klutz. They all look just like our Mr. Granite. To what do we owe the pleasure of your company, Mr. Granite? Well, that's grown-up talk for, what are you doing here? We have a very important mission, said one of the alien Mr. Granite. We have come to take your Mr. Granite home with us to Etenarg. What? Chapter 4. Saying goodbye is sad. The alien Mr. Granites were going to take our Mr. Granite away? Everybody started yelling and screaming and freaking out. No! Oh, come on, don't go! As much as I hate to use the L word, we all love Mr. Granite. We didn't want him to leave. Mr. Granite has been teaching at our school for a long time, said Mr. Klutz to the aliens. Why are you suddenly showing up now? Well, that's a good question. That's why Mr. Klutz is the principal. We do apologize for our lateness, said one of the Mr. Granites. Etenarg is 100 million light years away from Earth, and it took us a long time to get here. And besides, we got stuck in traffic. He was definitely lying about that. I don't even think they have traffic in outer space. Whenever my parents are late for anything, they always say they were stuck in traffic. That's the first rule of being a grown-up. Here's the traffic they were in. I wondered if the alien Mr. Granites were going to peel off their faces. Aliens are always peeling off their faces in movies. That's the first rule of being an alien. And peeling off your face is cool. I wish I could peel off my face. Hey, are you going to peel your faces off? I asked the Mr. Granites. Don't mind if I do, they all replied. The alien Mr. Granites reached up to the tops of their heads with both hands. All the girls screamed. I covered my eyes with my hands. I wanted to see the Mr. Granites peel off their faces, but at the same time, I didn't want to see what was underneath. What if it's scary? So I covered my eyes, but I opened my fingers so I could look between them. All the Mr. Granites pulled at the top of their heads. The heads opened up like pistachio nuts. Then they peeled their entire faces off. It was awesome. And you'll never believe in 1,100,000 years what the Mr. Granites look like underneath their faces. They looked exactly the same. Ah, that was very refreshing, said one of the Mr. Granites as he threw his old face off to the side.